Thank you, Professor Dhar. It was a great pleasure and honor to be part of this very distinguished panel, and I think we have heard a lot of things today from Professor Saxena, Professor Sharma, Professor Dhar himself, and Professor Mahajan. So I don't. I think and it has been long overshooting our time allotted. So I'll probably make one small remark and close this, and probably we should spend some time with questions and answers. Uh, if we look at, because a lot of things have been said about health sector already, about low allocations. I would like to highlight that the budget also shows a particular direction of the healthcare that the union government is trying to push us towards, and that is it's not new. It has been there. Every year the union government spends or cuts allocation on crucial schemes of primary care, scheme related to maternal and child health. For the National Health Mission, I wanted to bring it here. If you look at allocations in real terms from the year 2016-17, virtually there is no increase over this entire period of time in allocation. But then at the same time, a large part of the scheme being demand driven, we see every year that in the revised estimate and in the actual allocations increase. So what is the problem if allocation ultimately expenditure is increasing? What is the problem? One may ask. I want to point out that this tendency of lower allocation and finally increased expenditure shows that there is a huge demand for such schemes. The fund absorption capacity of state governments have increased, and there is further need to expand primary care, secondary care to vehicles like NHM. We need not only for maternal and child health, but also range of communicable, non-communicable diseases. We need greater investment, and we have seen how the health sector has suffered in this period of time. So there is ample scope of improvement. The national mental health, the tele-mental health program has been mentioned, but let me point out within the National Health Mission, the budget allocated to national mental health program is 40 crore rupees, which is just rupees 30 per person per year. So these issue has been raised repeatedly, but we need significant improvement in this. If we contrast this with the schemes that are incentivizing private sector in healthcare, the Prime Minister's Jan Arogya Yojana, the digital health mission, the Ayushman digital mission, we see significant jump in allocation. The Ayushman digital mission has got 560% increase in allocation at a time where our health sector needed basic infrastructure. And every year, the PMJY is unable to spend the budget it has been allocated. It spends only 30 to 40% of allocation, but then we see continuously the allocations are retained, and there is always hope that the private sector would step up and get the benefit of the scheme. But in the period of the crisis, we have seen how the private sector has failed. Now, so but then, what is the harm? The problem is the schemes, the components that could strengthen the health system. That those schemes are being neglected over the period, and for instance, the National Urban Health Mission is not receiving any significant allocation. And in the period of COVID, it has been become very clear that primary care in urban areas are in a poor state, and we need to spend more resources to rebuild the primary care in urban area. And NHM, NUHM could have been the vehicle which could strengthen that, but unfortunately, there is no such push. Rather, there is a push for tertiarization of healthcare, which is very unfortunate. There is a lot said about health sector. One last point I want to say: NHM is also important because large part of the health workforce, which are women, particularly the frontline health workers, the ASHA workers, the ANMs, the Anganwadi workers, they are not even paid, particularly ASHAs and Anganwadi workers are not even paid minimum wages. And we need to bring their rights, their safety, their concerns at the forefront. And we need to increase allocation because most of these frontline workers are women, majority, overwhelming majority of them are women. So we need to step up expenditure allocation in such schemes. Uh, I think I'll stop here because, and I would like to also probably hear the other participants who have been patiently hearing us for a long period of time. And thanks again for giving me this opportunity. And it has been a phenomenal learning experience hearing from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Indranil. Would have loved to hear you more. And thank you very much for considering the interests of the participants and allowing them to ask some questions. So now I'll open the floor for any questions or observations. Please keep your questions very limited, and even your observation should not be long because, as you can see, we have long overshot the time that we had at our disposal. So the floor is open. Please introduce yourself and direct your question to whichever panelist you want to answer. Thank you. You may raise your hand, in case anyone. I don't see any questions from anyone. So no one has any questions. I think the panelists have been convincing enough with their arguments, and there are no questions. So let me now try and conclude this meeting. When there is nothing much for me to actually summarize because there's been such exhaustive presentations by each of the panelists. I would say that this was a really challenging budget at an extremely challenging juncture for the country, which Nitya mentioned at the beginning. This is an exceptional situation that we are in, and the government has tried to provide the stimulus, looking at the longer term, and as many of us mentioned, that increase in capital expenditure is something that is welcome. Certainly something that the country needs, and in the context of what Professor Atul Sharma said, that our capital investment has been coming down, and given that situation, we needed to do something. The government needed to reverse that situation, and it has done in a substantial manner. The only issue that many of us have been worried about is that is there enough for overcoming the crisis that we have today? And there is no doubt that we are still in the midst of the problem, and several sectors, as each one of the panelists mentioned, are really in a serious problem. The point that Professor Ashwani Mahajan made, that the government acts as a facilitator, that's a very important point that he made, and that is the reason why we feel that the budget making exercise is so very important. That the government has a significant role to play, and we've all along been pointing out that the entire neoliberal agenda will not take the country anywhere. The government has to be a very important player in this framework, and the fiscal policy of the government is extremely important to give direction to the economy. And that's the reason why many of us have been arguing that the stimulus that was provided in 2020, the fiscal component of that should have been much more as compared to what the government thought that, pumping in money through the Reserve Bank. And so rather than going in for monetary policy solutions, fiscal policy was very important. It was something which even the IMF was emphasizing very strangely, that the importance of fiscal policy, which was done and was followed in many countries. So the government as a facilitator, and the finance minister has also mentioned that government spending and the government spending on, especially on the on capital creation of more capital, would draw in more private investment. So this whole crowding in the aspect that the finance minister mentioned, and Professor Ashwani Mahajan also indicated that. I think that's an important point, and we have seen it in the past also. That the government gave tax breaks to the corporates, but we didn't see commensurate investment increase. Of course, immediately after that, we had the pandemic. But the private sector always looks at the market conditions, and unless the demand conditions recover and become good enough for them to put in their money, they are not going to be forthcoming. And therefore, we felt that it was necessary for the government to take proactive measures to stimulate demand, and therefore the points that we all made about increasing Narega spending, or even the National Food Security Act, where the poor would actually have some disposable income in order to create a certain amount of demand. So in the short run, all this is important, but in the longer run, again, I think every panelist mentioned about the importance of creating more jobs. And how do you create more jobs, and especially the challenges to create jobs in the in the informal economy, because the formal large corporates are not creating jobs. And how do you actually support jobs? How do you ensure that the MSME sector gets and the micro enterprises get back on track? And micro enterprises, all of us know that they don't get support from the formal financial the credit system. So what can be done about these smaller enterprises so that they can get up on their 2 feet? So these are some of the issues that we thought was important. And, we will, I think finally I would say that we'll always remain a bit dissatisfied with the government does, because I think the expectations we have for this country and the younger people is sky high. Especially after there was a report published by the World Economic Forum in their recent before the recent Davos meeting, which said that there are at least 5 major pain points that India faces, and one of them is youth hopelessness, and that's one issue that I think all of us are mindful of with the kind of job situation in this country, and therefore we would all expect that the government actually puts its best foot forward in order to get the country on a steady and a virtuous cycle. So with that, I would again, on behalf of all the panelists and my own self, like to thank CSD, Professor Muchkund Dubey, Professor Nitya, and of course Akhil, for having us all here, and Akhil for facilitating this whole program. It's been wonderful. So I'd like to close the meeting here, and thank you very much, and hope to see you again in one of the future SDF meetings. Thank you very much. All the very best.
Thank you, sir. I join Professor Biswajit Dhar in extending a warm thanks on the behalf of SDF CSD to all of you who took out time from your busy schedule and enriched the discussion with their presentations and deliberations. We hope to see you and welcome you in our future programs as well. Thank you. Thank you very much.